Marley was dead. To begin with, old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, a wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. Once upon a time, of all the good days of the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. The door was open that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who in a dismal little cell beyond was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle!" "God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew. "Bah! Humbug! Oh, don't be cross, Uncle. What else can I be when I live in such a world of fools as this? If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. You keep Christmas in your own way, let me keep it in mine." "Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow." "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. "I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends?" "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. Scrooge's clerk, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let two other people in. "At this festive time of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at the present time." "Are there no prisons? And the workhouses, are they still in operation?" They are still. I wish I could say they were not. A few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy some meat and drink for the poor, and means of warmth. What shall I put you down for?" "Nothing!" cried Scrooge. "I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I've mentioned, and those who are badly off must go there." Many can't go there, and many would rather die." "Well, if they would rather die, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Good afternoon, gentlemen." At length, the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. Bah! Humbug! Who are you? In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley. "It is required of every man," said the ghost, "the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world, oh, woe is me, and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth, and turn to happiness." "But you are fettered," said Scrooge, trembling. "Tell me why." "I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link, yard by yard. Is its pattern strange to you? Or would you know the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? 'Twas full as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain." "Jacob? Oh, Jacob Marley, tell me." "Business! Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. I'm here tonight to warn you You have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate. You will be haunted by 3 spirits.
I think I'd rather not,
said Scrooge. Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow, when the bell tolls 1. Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next night, when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more. And look, that for your own sake, you remember what has passed between us. The hour bell sounded with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy 1. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn. Scrooge, starting up into a half-recumbent attitude, found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man, diminished to a child's proportions. Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me? I am the ghost of Christmas past. Rise and walk with me. As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall. They were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city, where shadowy passages passed and repassed, where shadowy carts and coaches battled for the way, and all the strife and tumult of a real city were. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it. Know it? Was I apprenticed here? They went in. The sight of an old gentleman sitting behind such a high desk that if he had been 2 inches taller, he might have knocked his head against the ceiling, Scrooge cried in great excitement, "Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig alive again!" "Yo ho, my boys," said Fezziwig. "No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Clear away, my lads. Let's have lots of room here. Hilly-ho, Dick. Cheer up, Ebenezer." It was done in a minute. The floor was swept, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as you would desire to see upon a winter's night. Cried Scrooge. "A small matter," said the ghost, "to make these silly folks so full of gratitude. He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?" "No, it isn't that," said Scrooge, heated by the remark. "He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune." He felt the spirit's glance and stopped. "What is the matter?" said the ghost. "Oh, nothing particular. I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now, that's all." "My time grows short," observed the spirit. "Quick." Again, Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of life. His face had not the harsh and rigid lines of later years, but it had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a mourning dress, in whose eyes there were tears which sparkled in the light. "It matters little," she said softly. "To you, very little. Another idol has displaced me. And if it can cheer and comfort you in time to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve." "What idol has displaced you?" "A golden one. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one, until the master passion, gain, engrosses you. Well, have I ever sought release? In words? No, never. In what then? In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in everything that made my love of any worth or value in your sight. May you be happy in the life you've chosen. She left him, and they parted. Spirit, said Scrooge in a broken voice, remove me from this place. I told you these were shadows of the things that have been, that they are what they are. Do not blame me. No, leave me. Take me back, haunt me no longer. He was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further of being in his own bedroom. He had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep. Awakening in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was again upon the stroke of 1. It was his own room. There was no doubt about that. But it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceilings were hung with living green. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light, as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, heaped up on the floor to form a kind of throne, with turkeys, geese, great joints of meat, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum pudding, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, immense 12 cakes, and seething bowls of punch. In easy state upon this couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in shape not unlike Plenty's horn. He held it up to shed its light on Scrooge. I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me. Spirit, said Scrooge submissively, conduct me where you will. If you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it. Touch my robe. They stood in the city streets on Christmas morning, where the people made a rough but brisk and not unpleasant kind of music, and scraping the snow from the pavement in front of their dwellings and from the tops of their houses. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate or the town, and yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad that the clearest summer air and brightest summer sun might have endeavored to diffuse in vain. On the threshold of the door, the Spirit smiled and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with a sprinkling of his torch. In came little Bob, the father, his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a crutch and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. And how did little Tiny Tim behave? Asked Mrs. Cratchit. Oh, as good as gold, said Bob, and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much. He thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me, coming home, that he hoped that people saw him in the church because he was a cripple. And it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. At last the dishes were set on and grace was said. And then Bob proposed, a Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us. Which all the family re-echoed. God bless us, everyone, said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his, as if he loved the child and wished to keep him by his side and dreaded that he might be taken from him. Spirit, said Scrooge with an interest he had never felt before, tell me if Tiny Tim will live. I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die. No, said Scrooge. No, kind spirit. Say he will be spared. Well, what then? If he be like to die, he had better do it, and decrease the surplus population. Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the Spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief. Man, said the ghost, if man you be in heart, Will you decide what men shall live, what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven, you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child. And now, without a word of warning from the ghost, they stood in a bright, dry, gleaming room with the spirit standing smiling by his side. Ha ha ha! Laughed Scrooge's nephew. He said Christmas was a humbug as I lived, and he believed it too. Oh, more shame for him, Fred, said Scrooge's niece indignantly. Oh, he's a comical old fellow, that's the truth. Not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offenses carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, whatever he is. The whole scene passed off in the breath of the last words spoken by his nephew, and he and the spirit were again upon their travels. Much they saw, and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirits stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful. On foreign lands, and they were close at home. By struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope. By poverty, and it was rich. The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost. He saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee. For in the very air through which this spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. Am I in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come? Said Scrooge. The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand. Ghost of the future, I fear you more than any specter I've seen. Will you not speak to me? It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them. The scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bed, a bare, uncurtained bed. A pale light fell straight upon the bed, and on it, plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man. Spirit, this is a fearful place. In leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson. Trust me, let us go. The phantom pointed as before. A churchyard. Here then the wretched man whose name he had now to learn lay underneath the ground. Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of things that will be? Or are they the shadows of things that may be only? Still the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. Spirit, hear me. I'm not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been. Why show me this if I'm past all hope? I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on this stone. Holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own to make amends in. I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. I'm as giddy as a drunken man. Merry Christmas to everybody. Happy New Year to all the world. What's today? Cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes.
Today? Why, it's Christmas Day.
It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. Spirits have done it all in one night. Well, they can do anything they like. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow. Do you know the poulterers in the next street at the corner?
I should hope I did.
Do you know whether they sold the prize turkey that was hanging there?
What, the one as big as me? It's hanging there now.
Is it? Go and buy it. Come back with the man in less than 5 minutes. I'll give you half a crown. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's, whispered Scrooge, rubbing his hand and splitting with a laugh. He dressed himself all in his best, and at last got out into the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth, and Scrooge regarded everyone with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant that 3 or 4 good human fellows said, "Good morning, sir. Merry Christmas to you." And Scrooge said often afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he had ever heard, those were the blithest in his ears. He went to church, he walked about the streets, watched the people hurrying to and fro, patted children on the head, questioned beggars, looked down into the kitchens of houses and up to the windows, and found that everything could yield him pleasure. And in the afternoon, he turned his steps toward his nephew's house.
Fred?
Said Scrooge. Why, bless my soul, who's that?
It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I've come to dinner. Will you let me in?
Let him in. It's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office the next morning. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late. That was the thing he set his heart upon. And he did it. Yes, he did. The clerk was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time.
Hello!
Growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as you could feign it.
What do you mean by coming in here this time of day?
It's only once a year, sir, pleaded Bob. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir.
I'll tell you what, my friend. I'm not going to stand this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, I am about to raise your salary. A Merry Christmas, Bob.
A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I've given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family. And we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl. Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, as good a man as the good old city knew. He had no further intercourse with spirits, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that truly be said of us, and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone.